Okay, this will be the third part in the series on modeling and managing ARCHICAD efficiently. We started off with different ways to select elements and then a video on isolating those elements out for quicker and easier editing. And now we're going to talk specifically about ways that we can edit things within ARCHICAD. Now we all know element settings. I can go here to my info box and select any of those settings. I can go into the full settings here and get into all of the settings, including classifications, properties, information sets, ID. There are some things in the info box that are not included in that element information. For those not familiar, Command T is a great shortcut to know. Everybody should be using that to quickly go to element settings. In this case, I have a wall selected, so I'm going to edit the settings of that selected wall. But geometry method is something that's only available in the info box for most tools. So if I go to place a new wall, I may want to select different geometry types, types of walls, etc. The other element or settings in the info box here are available in the element settings palette for each tool. But geometry method for beams, for walls, for columns are only available in the info box, not directly available in the element settings. So that's an important thing to note specifically about the element settings. Now it's also important to note with regards to element settings, if I take a look at here, for example, I have an object element, here I have a wall element, here I have a zone element. And you'll notice that here in the info box, the last selected element is always going to be the element that you're editing. So if I select a column last, go to the element settings, the only settings I'm going to change are for that column. So if, for example, I want to make this a different surface, it's only going to change the surface of that selected element type. The other elements will remain as is. If I deselect that, it'll go to the previously last selected element. So if you do a broad sweeping selection, and again go back to the videos on selecting elements, you can see here the last selected element in that selection is the section marker. So I'm not going to be able to edit any of the other element types in the element setting dialog here. It's only editing the section marker. So if I do need to make a selection, so here I see if I go Command Option T, I can go to the selection set. And here I can see these are all the element types that I have selected, 5 walls, 2 columns, etc. And these are all of the settings that they have in common. So pen, layer, renovation status, visible and relevant filters. Those are the only settings that those elements have in common. If I grab a smaller set here, and let's go ahead and deselect the zones and look at the selection set, I get a different pen number, different different layer, and again I can see here that it's picking the layer of the last selected element. But I can see that there are other element types here. So I can change the layer of all of these elements universally. So edit selection set is different than selection settings. Here in the polyline selection settings, I can edit anything with regard to the selected polylines, but it disregards the slabs, the objects, the walls, the other elements that have been selected. So the difference is Command T to go to selection settings, and then Command Option T to go to edit selection set. And that gives me the ability to change things like renovation settings, in some cases properties and classifications if they have those in common, layer, and pen. And again, this is going to be the first pen in an element settings. So things like walls that have multiple pens in their settings, it's not going to override all pens to use a different pen type. There are other ways to edit elements, and for this I want to pull up some of this in 3D. So specific settings, and let's go ahead and again, going back through the video, I could select all the zones and then select everything except the zones to isolate these out. So for example, if this wall is on the wrong story, I can go into the settings and say that this is going to go to the roof story. And then you'll notice this jumps up to the roof story height. Because in the wall settings, its height to current story is 0. And I'm just changing the story that it's on, so it's naturally going to move up in the model. Now, if I wanted these walls, for example, to be on the roof story, but maintain their location, you can right-click and relink the home story. So these will now be on the roof story, and if I come here into the floor plan, those no longer show here, but they do show here because they're living on the roof story. But their location within the model stays the same. In this case, that's just a hypothetical. I do want these to actually be on the first floor, but that's a great way to reassociate walls to a new story without repositioning them within the model. And that's a really important step to follow, depending on whether things need to move up in the model or need to stay where they're at and just associate with a new story so they show on a different floor plan. The last thing I want to cover here is specifically for remodels under palettes and renovation. If you're working on a remodel, this palette should be available in your work environment. And again, going back to if I select multiple element types and I go into the settings, I can only adjust the renovation status of the polyline in the element settings. I can go to the selection set and redefine what the renovation status is of this group of elements. But a quicker and easier way to do that is just to have this palette available, and then I can define those as existing, as demo, as new. However I need those to show up in my floor plan and what the status is. With the renovation palette, I can also define the status before I place an element, so you don't have to place the element and then go back and redefine it. So on remodel projects in particular, this palette is really critical. And that's all for this series.